What happens when a kingdom looks powerful from the outside, but is quietly collapsing from within? That was France in the late 1700s. To the rest of Europe, it still looked like a great power, rich, cultured, and influential. It had kings, courts, armies, philosophers, and one of the most famous capitals on earth. But beneath the gold and ceremony, the system was rotting. The state was drowning in debt, the people were starving. Privilege was concentrated at the top, and the majority of the population was carrying a burden it never agreed to carry. That is how revolutions begin. Not always with explosions, sometimes with a society that has been pushed too far for too long. The French Revolution was not just a political event, it was a collapse of an entire order. It tore apart monarchy, noble privilege, and the old social hierarchy that had governed France for generations. It created new ideas about citizenship, rights, and the people as the source of political power. But it also unleashed fear, violence, executions, and instability on a scale that shocked even its supporters. So this story is not simply about France overthrowing a king. It is about what happens when a society built on inequality reaches a breaking point. And it is about the terrifying truth that once a revolution begins, no one can fully control where it goes. Before the revolution, France was divided by law, tradition, and privilege. The first estate was the clergy, the second estate was the nobility, and the third estate was everyone else: peasants, workers, merchants, lawyers, professionals, and the growing middle class. The cruel logic of the system was simple. The first and second estates enjoyed enormous privilege, while the third estate made up nearly the entire population and carried most of the taxes. That was not a flaw in the system, it was the system, and systems like that can survive for a long time, until they suddenly cannot. France's monarchy appeared strong, but the state was financially broken. Years of war, especially the costly support for the American Revolution, had left the treasury weak. The tax system was inefficient and deeply unfair. The rich were often protected, the poor were squeezed, the government borrowed more money than it could repay, and every new crisis made the old structure harder to defend. Then came the harvest failures of 1788 and the rising cost of bread. That detail matters. Revolutions are often discussed in grand political language, but for ordinary people, politics is usually experienced through hunger. When bread becomes too expensive, the state stops looking abstract, it becomes personal. A hungry family does not need a philosopher to explain injustice. They can feel it at the market. At the same time, new ideas were spreading across Europe. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu challenged the old assumptions that kings ruled by divine right and that society had to remain permanently unequal. Rousseau argued that legitimate power should come from the people. Montesquieu promoted the separation of powers. Voltaire attacked corruption, intolerance, and abuse. These men did not start the revolution by themselves, but they helped make it possible by giving anger a language. For the first time, many French people could imagine a political world in which kings were not sacred, privilege was not natural, and government could be judged by whether it served the public. That question was dangerous, and in 1789, France could no longer avoid it. King Louis XVI called the Estates General in May 1789 because the monarchy needed money and hoped to solve the financial crisis. But when people are summoned to a crisis meeting, they often arrive with demands the ruler did not want to hear. The Third Estate wanted more than polite discussion. They wanted real political change. They believed the old voting structure was unfair because the privileged estates could outvote them, even though they represented far fewer people. In other words, the majority of France was trapped in a system where the minority had the power. That is not the kind of arrangement that stays calm for long. When the Third Estate found itself blocked and ignored, its representatives took a drastic step. They declared themselves the National Assembly and swore the famous tennis court oath, promising not to disband until they had given France a constitution. This was a turning point, because once a group declares that it represents the nation itself, the old government is no longer just facing protest, it is facing a challenge to its legitimacy. Then Paris entered the story. Rumors spread, fear spread, troops moved. The people of the city believed the monarchy might crush the assembly by force. In that atmosphere, panic and politics became almost impossible to separate. On July 14, 1789, a crowd stormed the Bastille. The Bastille was not important because it held many prisoners. In fact, it held very few at the time. It was important because of what it symbolized. It stood for royal authority, arbitrary power, and the idea that the king's force could appear at any moment to silence dissent. Its fall mattered more than its military value. The message was unmistakable. The old order was no longer untouchable. And once that belief takes hold, every wall in a kingdom starts to look fragile. Across France, the revolution spread. Peasants attacked symbols of feudal privilege. Records were burned. Manor houses were threatened. Fear moved through the countryside in what became known as the Great Fear. That is another important truth about revolutions. They do not stay in one city. Once people believe a new world is possible, the countryside can erupt just as fast as the capital. In August 1789, the National Assembly issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It promised liberty, equality before the law, and popular sovereignty. It was one of the most famous political declarations in modern history. It was also a promise far greater than what France could immediately deliver. And that gap between promise and reality would shape the rest of the revolution. At first, many people hoped the revolution could still be controlled. Maybe the monarchy could survive in a new form. Maybe France could become a constitutional monarchy. Maybe old power could be softened without being destroyed. That hope did not last. As the revolution deepened, trust between the king and the people collapsed. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette became symbols of detachment, suspicion, and, to many revolutionaries, betrayal. The monarchy seemed unable or unwilling to embrace the new political order. Then came one of the most damaging moments of all, the king's failed flight to Varennes in 1791. That event changed everything, because after that, many French citizens no longer saw Louis XVI as a reluctant reformer trapped in a difficult system. They saw a king who could not be trusted. If he tried to escape, where was his loyalty? If he opposed the revolution in private, could he ever truly accept it in public? Revolutions are often decided not only by what rulers do, but by what people think rulers intend to do. In 1791, France tried to establish a constitutional monarchy, but the experiment was already weakened by mistrust and instability. Then, foreign war pushed the crisis into a new phase. European monarchies feared the revolution would spread across their own borders. If France could overthrow its king, what might stop other peoples from asking the same question about their rulers? That fear was contagious, so external enemies gathered, and domestic fear grew with them. In 1792, the monarchy was abolished and France became a republic. A year later, Louis XVI was executed. Then Marie Antoinette followed. This was not just regime change, it was a point of no return. France had crossed from reform into revolution, and from revolution into the terrifying logic of political survival. Because once a society destroys an old order, it still has to answer a brutal question: what should replace it? And if no stable answer appears fast enough, fear rushes in to fill the gap. That is exactly what happened next. A few less discussed details make the French Revolution even more revealing. First, the Bastille had only a small number of prisoners when it was stormed, but that does not make the event less important. Symbolism was the real weapon that day. Second, the bread crisis was not a side issue. For ordinary French people, food prices were political reality. Hunger made revolutionary ideas easier to hear. Third, the great fear in the countryside was fueled by rumor as much as by direct violence. People believed nobles were plotting against them, and that fear alone helped drive attacks on feudal records and privilege. Fourth, many revolutionaries were not trying to create chaos. Some genuinely believed they were building a rational, fair society. Their intentions and the outcomes were often very different. Fifth, women played an active role in the revolution, especially in the early stages. The Women's March on Versailles in October 1789 forced the royal family back to Paris and showed that revolutionary energy was not limited to men. Sixth, not all French people supported the revolution. There were royalists, moderates, radicals, urban activists, peasants, and regional groups with very different interests. Seventh, the revolution did not destroy religion in a simple straight line. It transformed the relationship between church and state, but that process was contested, uneven, and often violent. Eighth, the Reign of Terror was not one uniform system of cruelty. It was a period shaped by war, fear, political rivalry, and revolutionary emergency. That does not excuse it. It explains how it became possible. Ninth, Napoleon did not emerge from nowhere. He rose because the revolution had already broken old structures and created a vacuum that a military genius could exploit. 10th, many of the revolution's most famous ideals outlived the chaos that produced them. Even when the governments changed, the language of citizenship, equality, and rights remained. Historians still debate what drove the French Revolution most powerfully. One view emphasizes economics and state failure. France's finances were broken, the tax system was unjust, and the monarchy could not solve the crisis. From this perspective, the revolution was born from structural collapse. Another view emphasizes ideas. The Enlightenment gave people new political language. It did not create the crisis, but it made rebellion thinkable. People were no longer merely angry, they could now explain why they were angry. A third view emphasizes social conflict. In this reading, the revolution was not only about kings and constitutions, it was also about who had status, who had privilege, and who would control the future of France. There is also disagreement about the terror. Some historians see it as a tragic but temporary emergency response to war and internal collapse. Others argue it became a political system of its own, where fear and suspicion were used to consolidate revolutionary power. Both interpretations matter. The revolution was not a single clean story. It was a collision of crisis, ideology, class tension, war, and human ambition. That is why it remains so difficult to reduce to a simple moral lesson. For ordinary people, the revolution was not a neat sequence of dates and declarations. It was uncertainty. It was bread prices rising while political speeches filled the streets. It was peasants fearing old feudal burdens would return. It was city crowds watching symbols of royal power fall. It was families arguing over loyalty. It was people trying to survive while governments changed faster than daily life could adapt. And for many, the revolution was full of contradictions. Some gained rights, some lost safety, some discovered political voice. Others discovered that power had simply changed hands and become more ruthless. The reign of terror made that reality impossible to ignore. Under the Committee of Public Safety and leaders such as Robespierre, the revolution became more severe. Anyone suspected of opposing the revolutionary government could be arrested, tried quickly, and sent to the guillotine. The state justified this as necessary defense. Its critics saw terror replacing justice. And the darkest irony is this: a revolution that began by attacking oppression can become oppressive when fear convinces its leaders that mercy is weakness. Thousands were executed. The streets carried the tension of suspicion. Ideals became accusations. The revolution was now devouring its own children. By 1794, Robespierre himself was overthrown and executed. The terror ended, but stability did not immediately return. France then entered the Directory, a weaker and more unstable government struggling with corruption, inflation, unrest, and political exhaustion. The revolution had shattered the old order, but it had not yet built a durable new one. That vacuum created space for a man who understood power as both military force and political opportunity. Napoleon Bonaparte was young, ambitious, and brilliant. He rose through the chaos of the revolution and understood something others missed. When people are tired of instability, they often welcome authority, even if that authority comes dressed as order. In 1799, Napoleon seized power in a coup. That effectively ended the revolutionary decade and opened a new chapter in French history. But the revolution's impact did not disappear. It destroyed feudal privilege. It challenged monarchy. It spread the idea that citizenship, not birth, should define political legitimacy. It helped spread nationalism across Europe. It inspired reformers and frightened kings. It also left behind a permanent warning. A revolution can begin with the dream of liberty, but liberty without justice can become chaos. Justice without restraint can become terror, and a society that tears down an old order must still answer the hardest question of all: what kind of power should replace it? The French Revolution changed France forever. It also changed the modern world, and the echo of its central struggle is still with us. Who has the right to rule?